Hey there, scary people, and welcome back to the One Scary Woman YouTube channel where you get to watch me make a feature film from concept to completion over the course of this next year. Now, if you're here, likely you also have a dream of doing this. So we're going to be going through step by step the entire process together. And this week, the focus is on brainstorming ideas. So we've already talked a bit about, finding the concept that is the right concept for you to use as you move forward with your film. And there's some practical things that you can think about when you're making that decision. So for that information, go back and check out the last couple videos. But today we're going to think more on the creative side. So how do you brainstorm ideas that are going to be interesting to you? Now, before I get started, what I will say is that people tend to have some anxiety around the process of generating ideas. And a question that I get very often is just, how do you get ideas? Where do you find ideas? And the truth is that ideas are actually everywhere. They're limitless. You can pull ideas from all over the place. What's actually much harder is fleshing an idea out into a full story. So I believe when people ask that question, they aren't really asking, how do you get ideas? What they're really asking is, how do you somehow magically get an idea that is already fleshed out into a full story that I can see and understand from start to finish? And that's a different process. That's a process we're going to come to in the coming weeks. But today, the focus just is on finding the ideas, which again, please know they're everywhere. So your life is full of them, whether it's from personal experience, whether it's things you can think of coming through your hobbies, your interests, your passions, whether even it's just from watching films or reading books that you love. And sometimes it can give you, a spin-off idea in your mind, or you can take one particular element and think, well, what if they ran with it this way? So ideas really are everywhere. So know that you don't have to have a fully fleshed out story when you have just an idea. You only need the idea and to be passionate about the idea, and we will work on fleshing it out into the full story that you're going to need to do a little later on. All right, so here we go. Here are 3 tips and tricks for helping you to brainstorm ideas. And number 1, when I work with my screenwriting students and we start this process, I always start by having them focus on some of the key elements of story and brainstorm from there. So there's 4 that I'm going to give you. So there's character, world, conflict, and theme. So I asked them to take each of these 4, and it's as simple as just setting a timer. You can just set 2 minutes for each. That's an 8-minute process. 5 minutes for each. Give yourself 20 minutes. It's not much time. And brainstorm as much as you can on each of these elements of story until you find one that is interesting enough to you that you want to keep going with it. So first, there's character. How many interesting characters can you think of? So this can come down to quirks. This is little idiosyncrasies in their personalities, or it can be, some really strong core personality trait. Do they have a really strong vendetta? Have they been betrayed? Do they have, the love of their life that they're just so passionate about? Whatever it is about that character that sets them apart, think about what you can create in terms of character. World. What kind of interesting world can you look at? And this doesn't necessarily mean brainstorming some complete fantasy, world like Lord of the Rings where you have to have like maps and all these other things. It doesn't have to go that in depth. An interesting world can simply be that someone has a very unusual job, which also relates to their character, but it's an interesting world because it's one that other people don't get to see. Or they just have a very unusual family. So the world within that house is different from the other people's families, that the average person would have in the world. So think in terms of world, the world those characters are going to be living in, and how is it different? How is it unique? Conflict is that 3rd one. So conflict is what is going to drive all stories. So what is the central conflict? And again, you don't have to have the whole idea yet. So just start to make a list. What are all the conflicts you can think of? You caught your boss doing something illegal. Now there's a conflict. Do you tell on them? And all that might bring, or do you stay quiet so that you can extort them? Of course, you would never do that, but maybe your character would. So that's a conflict. Conflicts between couples, conflicts between friends. How many conflicts can you brainstorm? Just keep going with it. And then finally, theme. So theme, the underlying message of your story. So what are some beliefs that you hold to be true? And what are some basic beliefs or sayings or expressions that you can just list out? Start to brainstorm from theme. So revenge is a dish best served cold. Honesty is the best policy. Love conquers all. These could all be potential themes. How many can you come up with? Because then later we will orchestrate a story around the theme to deliver that theme in a story setting. All right, so that's my first tip. Start brainstorming from those key story elements because they're really, really important to the script as a whole. All right, now my second tip is to try and take real life inspiration. So again, like I said, ideas are absolutely everywhere. Just pick up a newspaper, look at the news, not necessarily even the big news of the day. Go back a couple pages, look at some of the quirky stuff that's going on, unusual cases. What do you come across online? I see weird things all the time about, different unsolved mysteries or whatever the case may be, whatever you're into. Look for real life inspiration. Now, if you watch that Netflix show, The Movies That Made Us, you might know this. But the movie Nightmare on Elm Street was actually initially inspired by a real life story, which most people would never guess because, of course, Freddy Krueger, he's killing people in their dreams. Obviously, that was not a real life story, but it was inspired by a real life story. When Wes Craven read about Cambodian refugees in a refugee camp that were having dreams that were so intense about their experiences that they were passing in their sleep. And that gave him the idea of Freddy Krueger, which now is a franchise that has made who even knows how many gajillion dollars. So you never know where the seed of the idea is going to come from. But again, you develop it from there. So look for real life inspiration in the news. Look for real life inspiration in your own life. What could develop into an interesting story? Now, finally, tip number 3, put a spin on it. So what sort of spin can you either put on the ideas you've already come up with? You can look back at them and just simply ask yourself, how can I make this more interesting? How could you maybe mash 2 of the ideas that you've come up with to this point together so that you create something unique and fresh? So maybe you came up with a few ideas that you think are really interesting. Is there a way to connect them all into one story? And if all else fails, ask yourself, are there any stories in the public domain that maybe you could put a spin on? And I know that maybe this has been done a little to death, but there is a reason why movies like this are perennially popular. When someone takes a story written long ago, so like Romeo and Juliet or something like that, that's public domain, and you just give a new spin on it, a modern adaptation. So worst comes to worst, that's something you can do as well. And finally, one other tip, think about switching up the genre. So if you have an idea, but it seems kind of cliche, it's been done in that particular genre before, could you switch it to another genre, and would that then make the idea unique and fresh? It's worth playing around with. All right, so hopefully this helped you guys out, that you enjoyed. Please hit like and subscribe, and please join me back next week as we continue this journey towards making our films.